past 42 years, over 5,000 concerned people from across the globe have come together in Eugene, Oregon for the oldest and largest public interest environmental law conference in the world. This conference educates and inspires action on environmental and social justice goals. Here are some highlights of the 42nd Public Interest Environmental Law Conference.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us for the Kicking Gas panel, the movement to transition off methane in the Pacific Northwest. As the title suggests, we are going to be discussing ways to decarbonize the gas sector, looking at utility commissions, litigation, grassroots organizing strategies, and communication strategies. So we have an awesome group of panelists. I am going to let each panelist introduce themselves. And we are going to save questions until the end to make sure that we have time to get through all of the material.
I'm a senior attorney with Earth Justice Base in Seattle. I'm so honored that you chose to spend your time with us, and I'm so honored to share the podium with this group of brilliant and fierce advocates. I'm going to shake off the trauma of watching myself on that screen. I know that I don't sound that grating and look that old. Going to talk about the challenge of getting gas out of our homes, residential and commercial buildings. Burning fossil methane, aka natural gas, is one of the largest sources of carbon emissions in the country. It's also the fastest growing, and it is the lowest cost and frankly easiest way to reach our decarbonization goals. Because of this wonderful technology, the electric heat pump. Who has an electric heat pump in their home? Right. They're awesome, right? They keep you warm, keep you cool, incredibly efficient, and non-polluting. And when we stop burning gas for heat, hot water, and cooking in our homes, there's all sorts of other benefits in terms of pollution, as we just heard about. So the first step in the transition is, as the guy with the fantastic eyebrows said, the first challenge is to stop digging the hole deeper. And so the focus for the last few years has been on when we build new buildings, we require them to be built with electric heat, hot water, and cooking instead of gas. And that's where the challenge has been. By 2021, dozens and dozens of jurisdictions around the country had adopted local ordinances like Berkeley and Eugene to require or either require or incentivize use of electric rather than fossil fuel appliances in new buildings. And you could tell this is effective in this map. All these states in red had adopted statewide laws that prohibit local communities from doing that. So the party of economic and personal liberty has a sort of different flavor when it comes to fossil fuels. So as we heard in the film, City of Berkeley was one of the first, if not the first. Very simple and elegant statute. It essentially banned fossil fuel piping into new buildings. You can have whatever appliance you want, but you can't have a fossil fuel pipe or a gas pipe. The first community here in Oregon, of course, was Eugene. I think we have an elected official from Eugene here. Thanks to your leadership and the great work of the community and grassroots, Eugene adopted this wonderful ordinance to phase out fossil fuel infrastructure in new buildings. And these things don't happen in a vacuum. It requires a ton of organizing and community work led by people like Aya. So, if you're from Eugene, you have so much to be proud of in this. And yeah, as I said in the movie, this is a big deal. This is existential for the gas companies, and they put millions of dollars into this referendum, and we're going to politicize this issue of they're taking away your gas stoves and so on. So into this largely political fight over local ordinances came this surprising decision in this case, and this is where we get the CLE credits. We'll talk about a little bit of law. The California Restaurant Association, which was bankrolled by the California gas utilities, they paid all the legal fees for this, brought this sort of novel legal claim that local regulation at this building level is preempted by federal law called EPCA, Energy Policy and Conservation Act. What is EPCA? EPCA is a federal law that does a number of things. One of the things it does is directs the Department of Energy to set nationwide appliance efficiency standards. So there's one standard for like the energy efficiency of a refrigerator or a furnace or whatever, right? And one of the things the law does is say, okay, once the federal government sets this national efficiency standard, states can't set their own standards. And if, that makes a certain amount of sense. If you make refrigerators, you don't want an Oklahoma standard and Arkansas standard. So there's a national standard. Well, these guys said that just by limiting the use of gas appliances in buildings, you have run afoul of this federal preemption standard. And honestly, when this started, I was like, this isn't really a serious claim. And they lost at the district court, and they dismissed the case at an early stage. But they appealed to the Ninth Circuit. They drew 3 Republican-appointed judges, including 2 judges appointed by you-know-who. And the majority opinion said that, EPCA doesn't just preempt local appliance efficiency standards. It preempts, or it cuts off any regulation that implicates the use of a regulated appliance. So it transformed a limit on local efficiency standards into essentially a right to use any regulated appliance. And if you sort of think about the logic of that, it gets in the way of any number of like basic police power functions of the state. Like you can't prohibit a gas burning furnace in the neonatal ICU, or you can't regulate dorm fridges. I mean, it's crazy the scope of this ruling. So the fallout was that it created significant uncertainty for communities like Eugene and others around the country that adopted these ordinances. They were at risk of getting sued themselves. There was a very vigorous petition for rehearing en banc to the Ninth Circuit, joined by the Department of Energy, which implements EPCA. And also, the Ninth Circuit has completely gone off the rails here. Rehearings en banc are very hard to get. It wasn't successful, but the opinion was amended, and it was just so ridiculous for you lawyers. They just went in and they just inserted the word narrow in like 7 places. And like there's nothing narrow about the ruling, and like if you just say it's narrow and don't change the logic, I don't know what it does. But so what's left? Are local communities hamstrung in the wake of Berkeley? No, not at all is the message. There's a lot of options. I'm going to buzz through these really quickly. EPCA itself contains an exemption from its preemption provisions for building codes. As long as you don't ban specific appliances, you can set performance standards, efficiency performance standards, that effectively make it pretty difficult to use gas appliances. And that's just because heat pumps are so much more efficient than gas. We already have an example of this. The state of Washington has adopted statewide building code that doesn't prohibit gas, but it really makes it pretty hard. You have to have like really thick walls and really intense windows and stuff if you're so keen to have a gas furnace. Why can't I hit one button? Kara's going to talk about utility side regulation. The Ninth Circuit was very clear that remains open. States have a lot of authority over regulating the provision of gas. The Berkeley decision was just talking about once the gas shows up at your doorstep. A third post-Berkeley option is the regulation of air emissions. Why isn't this preempted? Well, because the Clean Air Act gives local communities and states a decent amount of authority to regulate air quality. So you don't regulate appliances, you regulate air quality. And we've seen this. The city of Seattle adopted a performance standard for air quality that gets at existing buildings, not just new buildings. And then the last option is there's also authority under the Clean Air Act to regulate appliances. So Bay Area Air Quality Management District has already done this. California is looking at it statewide, is to set air pollution standards for appliances. Again, you use whatever fuel you want, but it's got to meet an air quality standard, and fossil fuels really can't meet that standard under current technology. So I think the takeaway that I really want people to get is Berkeley was a speed bump. It's, the option of just banning gas is not really available in the Ninth Circuit. And I'll note that the Ninth Circuit covers a number of Western states. New York has passed a Berkeley-style ordinance. It has been challenged in federal court under the same theory. If you are someone that worries about circuit splits and the Supreme Court getting their hands on this, that's a good thing to worry about. I'm gonna skip this for a second and just I'm almost out of time. Shift gears a little bit. So the states of all the West Coast states have adopted aggressive greenhouse gas targets, have a number of policies in place to phase out fossil gas. And in light of that, it seems like a weird time to be expanding the provision of methane gas to these states, but that is exactly what is happening. The GTN pipeline, which you see the map here, which is for California, Oregon, and Washington, was recently approved by FERC to significantly expand capacity. There's a whole panel on this you should check out tomorrow. We are suing FERC alongside the states of Washington and Oregon on a really crucial legal principle, which is, doesn't FERC have to consider the fact that these states are working hard to phase out fossil gas when they approve expansion of gas, which is not something that they were willing to consider. So in closing, I'll turn it over to my colleagues here. I am absolutely convinced that a generation from now, people will look at us in awe and wonder that the way that we heat our homes is to dig up Jurassic era rotting ferns and dinosaurs and pipe them into our homes and burn it. Like, it's really stupid. It blows up. It's bad for your health. It's incredibly inefficient. And we have these wonderful alternatives. So we are going to make this transition. It is happening. But we need all of you to help in whatever way it is you can, to talk to your local builders, utilities, governments, to help us land that plane. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'll turn it over to Kara.
I'm going to talk about the Public Utility Commission. And do not go to sleep, folks. This is important, right? This is important, and I actually woke up this morning really excited to talk about it. So my name, Dylan, this is for you. My name is Kara Saylor. I'm the director and one of two staff attorneys, nearly three staff attorneys at the Green Energy Institute. So for those of you who don't know us, GEI is a climate policy and energy law organization. We're housed in Lewis and Clark Law School's Environmental, Natural Resources, and Energy Law program. And we focus on developing smart and comprehensive strategies to support a swift and equitable transition to a carbon-free energy grid. So that's a little bit about us and where we come from. I, throughout this, am going to call what we're talking about natural gas. That is what the law talks about it. That's just in my head. So just so you know, I'm going to call it natural gas or gas. It's the same thing. So as a climate policy and energy law organization, GEI has been deeply involved in dockets, which are that's the official name that the Public Utility Commission uses to describe the different matters that they handle. And just in the last 2 years, we have been engaged in examining the costs and technology associated with decarbonizing natural gas and evaluated natural gas utility rates and planning. So what does a Public Utility Commission do? It's an economic regulator. So that doesn't sound very sexy, right? We're not talking about health. We're not talking about safety necessarily. We're not talking about climate directly. But the challenge is all of those things are directly related to what it is that the Public Utility Commission is looking at. You just have to use the language that they understand, right? And that falls within their authority, so they know that they have the authority to act. You can see here that I've just flagged the two different Pacific Northwest Oregon, so the Oregon Public Utility Commission on the one, and then the Washington UTC, which is the Utilities Transportation Commission. And you can see the different mandates that each have, and be thinking about how do we get those things we care about, health, safety, climate, into the mandate, right? Ensure safe, reliable, and quality utility services, evaluate utility costs, risks, and performance to ensure just and reasonable rates. And then more recently, the PUC is also obliged to consider the impacts of their decision-making on utility customers, and importantly, those in traditionally underserved communities. Now, I thought Washington UTC's language was really interesting on their website. They have a mandate to be a pro-equity, anti-racist government organization. I don't know that I've ever seen that on any agency's website. That is pretty cool. They also similarly have to ensure safe, reliable, equitable, that's in their mandate, that's different from Oregon PUC's, and fairly priced service. So you know, what does this matter? Like I said, I've been thinking a lot about how to get you all excited about the opportunities at the PUC. And if you, as I'm talking through some of the dockets that we've been engaged in, you might be thinking, gosh, that just feels like nibbling around the edges. But I think that there are two reasons why this work matters. The first is that it's a rare obligation of a state agency to think about and plan for the future. And the PUC is the only state agency really whose actions impact the future. I mean, other agencies evaluate, like the Oregon Department of Energy will be sort of setting the strategy for Oregon. But this agency, its mandate is to look at what the utility is doing now and up to 20 years into the future. It also, at the heart of, so I would say that, you know, as part of that, it has to grapple with the economic impact of gas expansion, and therefore, sort of by proxy, the economic impact of climate change. And at the heart of its obligation, it has a duty to protect customers. And second, as you'll see, as I talk through some of the slides, the processes that I described, they appear opaque, and I think they are initially. But I will say that the Public Utility Commission is very accessible and willing to, the staff are incredibly available and willing to walk folks through the process. And then the other thing that's interesting is that regular citizens, the folks in this room, have the opportunity to ask questions directly of the utility. So you don't always have that opportunity, right, with polluters in the air quality permit context. You don't have the opportunity to approach them directly, and those processes are involved then in at the end of the day what the agency does with the information. Okay, so I'm going to set the stage here a little bit. We have 3 gas-only utilities in Oregon. 48% of households use gas. Northwest Natural is by far the largest gas utility in Oregon. It serves the largest population centers, including Portland. Just as a reminder, many of the folks in the room may know this, but just in case not, beginning in 2022, gas utilities were required to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions pursuant to the Cap and Reduce program that the Oregon's Environmental Quality Commission adopted. That's called the Climate Protection Program. We also call it a Cap and Reduce. That prompted Oregon's Public Utility Commission to initiate an investigation. This is also kind of cool that the agency could do this, as to how the program might impact gas utility planning and rate making. And through that process, with the incredible advocacy of dozens of organizations, the PUC took a really hard look at what decarbonization of our gas utilities will really require, and recommended some changes to utility planning as well as rate making. But rather than open a larger docket about how best to do that, the commissioners decided to implement each of those sort of decisions in each of the dockets as they came up. So it's been sort of an iterative process over the course of the years. But as many of you know, the Oregon Court of Appeals just this year, January 2nd, or I think I came into work and there it was, beginning of the year, invalidated the CPP. On the basis of a technical notice flaw. So importantly, the courts really did not touch on the Environmental Quality Commission's authority to adopt and implement the CPP. And in fact, Governor Brown's executive order, which prompted the CPP's regulations for being enacted, that executive order still exists, and it directs DEQ and the EQC to cap and reduce greenhouse gas emissions from all liquid and gaseous fuels, including natural gas, consistent with the emissions reductions directions that are set out in the order. So that is sort of the underlying basis, legal requirement. But, does that change what the Public Utility Commission does? What do we have left? We have something called integrated resource plans. So this is what I was telling you about the PUC being able to do this forward-looking planning. And this is how they do it. You can see the three of them here. This is a roadmap for providing reliable and least cost, least risk service to the utilities customers, consistent with state and federal energy policies. And this is important while addressing and planning for uncertainties. So Oregon has had what was initially termed least cost planning since 1989. And least cost planning came about because of something that's known as whoops. It was the Washington Public Power Supply System, which overbuilt to meet what ended up being an inaccurate electricity forecast. So whoops was responsible for the development of 4 nuclear power plants and one of the largest bond defaults in U.S. history. The commission, after that happened, said it derived its authority to begin this least cost planning from its authority to protect customers and the public from unjust exactions and practices and to obtain adequate service at fair and reasonable rates. So you think about what the Public Utility Commission, the authority it has there. So 2 lessons from this history. The commission has, at least since 1989, addressed uncertainty. We are absolutely in a place of uncertainty right now, right? And in the absence of this CPP, it will continue to do that. It will continue to evaluate the uncertainty that the gas utilities face. The second, the commission has vast authority to initiate investigations to help utilities, stakeholders, and staff figure out and educate themselves about the risks of gas expansions. Okay, but why participate in an IRP in particular? One reason is that as the PUC flows through the guidelines that it's required to follow, at the end of the day, it is approving the utilities plan, and that puts into motion actions that are tricky to undo. So if the PUC says, yeah, it looks reasonable to spend millions of dollars on that capital investment to help pump more gas into that section of the city that seems to have a pressure problem, the utility will build that investment and then point to that PUC's determination of acknowledgement, thumbs up, to say we should get rate recovery. So you have to get in the process before it moves too far. And another reason is that stakeholders can have a meaningful role in the outcome. So who participates in what they do? What do they do? You can see some of the participants that we often see in plannings. We see Oregon Department of Energy, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, of course the staff at the commission, which are phenomenal. And then Energy Trust of Oregon. AWEC represents industrial consumers, and then CUB, the Citizens Utility Board. We should all support CUB, donate to them. They do amazing work, but they need our help. They need advocates. So we attend workshops, we ask a lot of questions, we suggest changes, we offer resources, we prepare comments, and then we actually intervene in the docket once the filing is made by the utility. And we have prioritized, and I'll just track a little bit of what we've done. We've prioritized the involvement of new, GEI has prioritized the involvement of new and different stakeholders, many of whom are unfamiliar with the process, but we can kind of hold their hands and walk them through the process. Staff and interveners, they identify questions they have for the company, and then they hold a workshop, and the company is there in front of the commission, and they have to answer questions from the commission. And they're often hard questions about whether they've done the proper planning, whether they've done the proper modeling, and whether they have the proper investments planned. So just to flag again, the importance of this process, because
It'll be back in a minute.
okay. Oh, thank you. You don't need it anyway. There's too many words. But because once this plan is acknowledged, it makes it harder to show that the investment was imprudent when you get to the rate case. So what did we see? And I had the slides show sort of what each of the plans have. Northwest Natural, Cascade, Avista. We saw a lot of alternative fuels. We saw biogas, hydrogen, synthetic methane. With respect to all three of those alternative fuels, there was an underrepresentation of costs and an overrepresentation of availability. I will say that some of the language from the commission was really excellent. Are the slides going to be available after?
Yeah, we can certainly.
We can make the slides available because there are some really great language from the commission about the importance of this planning process and why the commission is so important to evaluating how we move forward. So I'll just read one and then I'll be done. Okay, because I'm out of time. Yeah, I'm out of time. So just this one, the results of such an IRP may raise new questions about the business and the regulatory model. But that transparent evaluation is necessary for the PUC and the stakeholder community to engage with urgency and creative thinking about implications and corresponding regulatory changes to ensure that a financial healthy utility is capable of providing safe and reliable gas service, right? So it's this, they're really grappling with this question of how do we're going to have people on the system for a while. We have to make sure that they have safe and reliable gas, but at the same time there are these existential questions about growing the system. Okay, oh wait, one more, really important. Why do we participate? Because we get to find out stuff like this. And I'm gonna pass it. This is the very newly filed Northwest Natural rate case. They're planning to invest money into promoting their product to specific categories of people. Go ahead.
Just real quick show of hands, how many people have heard the phrase or even said the phrase, now we're cooking with gas? Yeah, it's sort of just embedded itself in our culture a little bit. And that's a little bit of why the Gas Leaks Project, my name is Caleb Haringa, I'm the program director for the Gas Leaks Project, why we launched a couple years ago is to really kind of change the narrative amongst the public on these issues around gas and the climate, health, and safety harms. We've been doing a variety of paid campaigns to sort of directly take it to the public and change the perception there. We've also been trying to hold the industry accountable a little bit for the way it misleadingly markets gas. As you see here, these are two different advertisements from Partnership for Energy Progress, which is the sort of front group that was formed by a coalition of gas utilities in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah, they've been very active in both Washington and Oregon. And you see with these, the word clean is very prominent in almost all the advertising the industry uses. And there's a reason for that. They've been leaning really heavily into natural and clean and all those kind of things for decades. Since the 1930s or 40s when Now We're Cooking with Gas was cooked up in a PR firm somewhere and brought to the Bob Hope show and embedded into a whole bunch of culture. And they haven't been stopping. There's continual advertising to the public. Oftentimes that is, in one way or another paid for by gas customers in some ways. None of those, the industry likes to make a distinction between customer money and shareholder money. The shareholders would not have any money if it wasn't for customers. So this is happening pretty regularly everywhere. And so we've been trying really hard to call it out where it happens. We petitioned the Federal Trade Commission, which right now is looking at updating their green guides, which provide guidance to companies about how they can market their products, the sustainability of their products. We have pushed really hard, and we pushed in Seattle, and the garbage trucks in Seattle had some advertisements talking about how they run on renewable natural gas, and when you actually broke it down and looked at it, it was like a little sliver of renewable natural gas, and the rest of it was conventional methane. And so, thanks to pressure there from local advocates, they've had to change their advertising on that. And do think it's really important that we be clear about what methane is and the harms of it. So. Something to keep an eye out. And because of all these decades of misleading advertising, we see pretty clearly when you poll the public that people tend to actually have a favorable opinion of natural gas. They tend to think it's clean because they've been told that. This has always been pitched as like the diet fossil fuel on some level, like better than coal or better than oil. And of course, when you actually add up all the methane pollution from the system, from the fracking, from the pipelines, from storage facilities, there's a lot of evidence that it's just as bad as coal, or even worse in some cases, especially when you're exporting it, as we've all heard about here recently. So, and this is pretty consistent. When you talk about, do you like natural gas? It's generally, yeah, that's great. And then you ask people, do you like methane gas? And there's a huge public education needs to happen because much of the public hasn't even heard of methane. So it's important. That's why it's very vital to sort of re-examine what we're calling this and how it's being presented to the public. Some of this was covered in the film that we started with, and I'll be concise too because don't want to restate too much and want to leave time for Q&A. But in addition to just general advertising, there's a whole bunch of stuff that the industry is doing to really mislead the public on these things, mislead regulators on these things. We mentioned the kids' activity books that Northwest Natural and other utilities were distributing in schools. The Northwest Natural in particular has hired scientists or experts that even had direct connections to the tobacco industry to sort of muddy the waters when it comes to the science on the harms of gas stoves. We have a list on our website. There are 50 studies dating back to the 1970s that find a very real harms from gas cooking compared to electric cooking in the home. It's not really a matter of debate, as no matter what they want to say. And we mentioned the front groups, Eugene Residents for Energy Choice in the film, Partnership for Energy Progress. Those continue to do a lot of work in the public. And the other thing, most recently, as I was putting this together, I'd totally forgotten about it, but just a couple months ago, The Guardian reported that Northwest Natural was literally offering incentives to builders to include gas appliances in homes, literally direct payments to do it. And so it's just a sense of what the stakes are for the industry, and kind of why it's very important as we talk to the public, as we talk to our friends and colleagues that are doing this work, that we use the right terms and call out the industry when they're being misleading about this. So I'll kick it to the next speaker here a little bit, but just GasLeaks has a couple really exciting ad campaigns launching actually on Monday. One of them is called Hot and Toxic, and it's a parody of a reality show in which a woman is stuck in a home with toxic roommates, and each of the toxic roommates represent a different toxin found in natural gas. So keep an eye out for that. It's going to be going around listservs and such, and we're really excited to do some fun stuff there. The other thing I'll mention is that we're really interested in holding the American Gas Association accountable for all of the misinformation they've been peddling on that, and there's going to be opportunities to engage in that as well. So that's about it, and I'll leave some time here.
Good morning, everyone, and a special welcome to any gas industry representatives in the audience. My name is Danny Noonan. I'm a climate and energy strategist at Breach Collective. Don't let my tardiness and disheveled appearance fool you. I'm actually highly educated and experienced. In fact, I have a law degree from an Australian law school, and I mention that as a disclaimer. I'm not a US attorney. I'm not barred in Oregon or any other US state, so I'm not holding myself out as an attorney, and nothing I say should be construed or relied upon as legal advice. I need to say that for many reasons. All right, so building on what Kara said about gas utility accountability through the PUC and some of what Caleb just said about misinformation that gas utilities and trade groups are entering into, I'm going to be talking a little bit about potential legal mechanisms for accountability outside of the Public Utilities Commission, and focusing specifically on gas utilities misrepresentation around the air quality effects and impacts of using gas appliances. And so I guess like the context for this is that late last year we a coalition of groups submitted a letter to the Oregon Attorney General asking them to investigate Northwest Natural's air quality claims under Oregon's Unlawful Trade Practices Act, which I'm going to refer to as the UTPA. So this presentation, for the sort of 10 minutes or so I had a lot of slides shared for CLE purposes, but I'm going to try and sort of race through a lot of this content because it's a little bit wonky and technical, a lot of issues of statutory interpretation. But I'm going to talk about the UTPA, I'm going to talk about Washington's equivalent act, which is the Consumer Protection Act, and then I'm also going to talk about some of the types of claims that gas utilities are making that I think could, fall within the jurisdiction of this act. So, with that being said, the UTPA is Oregon's main consumer protection statute, and it protects consumers from a sort of broad swathe of conduct. And it also gives both private litigants, so individuals or organizations, as well as the Attorney General, the ability to bring a suit, but the Attorney General has much greater investigatory and enforcement powers under the UTPAs, and don't have to prove all the elements that private litigants do, particularly, Article 3 standing purposes. And so I included this case on the slide. I'm not going to go into it. I just included to note that Oregon courts have interpreted the UTPA so that it applies not just to sort of affirmative falsehoods, incorrect statements, but also withholding factual information in a misleading way. And I think I'll talk about why I think that's particularly relevant to what gas utilities are doing in a moment. The main case I'm going to talk about very briefly is the Living Essentials decision. This case was instituted by Attorney General Rosenblum against the manufacturers of 5-Hour Energy. I think are all familiar with 5-Hour Energy, little packets of caffeine, essentially. And the case was brought actually about the non-caffeine ingredients and some of the claims that the manufacturers of 5-Hour Energy were making, as well as some claims they were making that suggested that doctors overwhelmingly approve of using 5-Hour Energy, which, Anyway, the case was dismissed by the trial court because they read into the Unlawful Trade Practices Act a requirement that that representations be material to consumer purchasing decisions, that you can sort of demonstrate that this would influence whether or not someone bought 5-Hour Energy. And they found that the particular claims that were being prosecuted were not, they found that they weren't material. The Oregon Court of Appeals agreed on this point, and then the state further appealed this to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court sided with the state and disagreed with the lower courts and found that the text, context, and legislative history demonstrate that the statute unambiguously does not require proof that a defendant's conduct was material to purchasing decisions. In other words, misleading conduct per se, that it is actionable under the UTPA. So you don't have to demonstrate that, someone would have not purchased this thing or not, taken this service had they not been misled. Thank you. And the court also found that the absence of reading this requirement in essentially didn't have, at least on its face, free speech implications. And we can talk a little bit about sort of potential as-applied implications as well. So that's Oregon's Consumer Protection Act, the UTPA. Washington's, I'm going to touch on very briefly. This is an even sort of broader statute is written, and many of the terms are not defined in the way they are in Oregon, so it's been up to courts to interpret those, and the broader packet of slides I included for CLE purposes includes a couple cases sort of interpreting those terms. However, unfortunately, the statute also has a section that excludes from its jurisdiction actions that are regulated by the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission. My background in the legal world is in plaintiff litigation, and I look at a language like that and I'm like, we can get around it, we can make the argument. And, if we're talking about sort of an attorney general investigation, there's probably a question whether, like, at a sort of pre-litigation stage before a lawsuit's actually filed, whether a gas utility would try to say, you're trying to correct our misinformation, but you have no jurisdiction here, so we're not even going to respond, That would be an interesting PR move by a utility, I think. But I think there's at least a question that Washington statute in particular disclaims or excludes utilities from its jurisdiction. And this just brings me to some more general considerations when we're talking about potential lawsuits, is, whether a state or private action would be the way to go. Which kinds of misrepresentations would be most actionable? So we've seen claims being made, as Caleb mentioned, by waste disposal services using just a tiny portion of renewable natural gas and saying that their things are running on renewable natural gas. Unfortunately, some of the broader claims that utilities are making around renewable natural gas at the moment get at these like sort of technical definitions of what is RNG and renewable thermal credits and things like that, and it's been a subject to some extent of PUC proceedings, but that can kind of get the fuzzier it gets, and the more that the utilities I think can be technically correct, the harder I think it would be to bring an action. And then the question here about like what kinds of representations are we talking about, because as we know, gas utilities also engage in regulatory processes and they lobby at the legislature and they engage in a lot of political speech, which has a higher level of protection arguably than commercial speech about their products and services. So this is, just to sort of close the door on the jurisdictional question, this is the PUC's enabling statute, and it does talk about the PUC having jurisdiction in all controversies respecting rates, valuation services, and all matters of which the Commission has jurisdiction. So I think there's also a question in Oregon as to whether that gives the PUC exclusive jurisdiction over gas utilities, or whether it's sort of a concurrent thing where the PUC regulates particularly the ability for utilities to set rates and cover costs, but we still also have this consumer statute for just general commercial conduct of utilities. And I should also note that Northwest Natural is not, as a corporation, is not just a utility. They have a number of businesses, including they sell appliances and an appliance center. So, I think, and then this case I've included here was from Washington, D.C., so not Washington State, and that was an action brought under the Consumer Protection Statute there, which was dismissed because it was found that Consumer Protection Statute in the District of Columbia also excluded gas utilities. So Oregon, I think, is in a pretty good shape in terms of statute, but we are seeing some of the early cases being brought against gas utilities for misinformation being dismissed on those grounds. That was the law. I'm just going to talk about the facts really quickly. So this is an example of conduct I think would be actionable. This is from Northwest Natural's website in 2021. And the main point here is there's actually significant qualitative and quantitative differences between electric and gas cooktops and how they're used and the types of pollutants they produce. In particular, electric cooktops do not produce nitrogen oxides, and yet this air quality information is suggesting that they're, comparable or if not identical. Northwest Natural recently updated their copy. I wonder why. But I still think this makes that sort of fundamental error. Whether you're using a gas or electric cooktop, and especially when, etc., at high temperatures use ventilation, yes, but there's still differences between the pollutants produced by those types of cooktops, and also the effect that ventilation has on them. There is some evidence showing that ventilation is not very effective at removing nitrogen oxides from the home, at least your standard range hood. Northwest Natural's been sponsoring this page so that it appears at the top of searches in Eugene for things like gas stoves, air quality. And this page stands in sort of pretty stark contrast to what they say about carbon monoxide, which is acknowledging that there is a risk here. Whereas you search NOx or nitrogen oxides on Northwest Natural's website, you will not find a single result. They also engage in misinformation here for some reason in saying that natural gas is non-toxic and only produces heat, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. We know there's dozens of co-pollutants that exist with utility-grade methane gas. Just so everyone knows, I'm not just picking on Northwest Natural. Cascade Natural Gas, a utility that also has a service territory in Oregon, also engages in misinformation and science denial on their website. And I've run way over time, but recommend, I included these slides just to show that Northwest Natural's misrepresentations in political fora are arguably even more egregious than what they're putting just to customers in bills and on their website. The evidence is improving all the time, and thinking about causation in a litigation context, we're starting to be able to attribute the level of asthma that is caused by gas stoves in different states. And there's also this really growing body of documentary evidence, as Caleb mentioned, going back to the 50s, if not earlier, of gas utilities and trade groups being aware of these risks and engaging in an explicitly tobacco industry style campaign to suppress that information. And so I recommend checking out that report as well. This was a bunch of other claims that I'm not going to get into, but I think there's actually quite a few potential causes of action for this type of conduct, if anyone has the stones to do it. Anyway.
Awesome. And I do want to just point out, we can share these slides with folks. My email will be at the end. I think it may be the easiest if folks just shoot me an email. I can share all of these slides with everyone. So hi folks, my name is Aya Cockrum. I am the coalition coordinator for Fossil Free Eugene, and we're going to do a little bit of a pivot in this presentation and talk about how we can kick gas from the grassroots. I've been working on this campaign for about 2 years now. So starting off to tell you a little bit about Fossil Free Eugene. So we are a coalition of grassroots organizations calling on the city of Eugene to follow through with the goals that it set for itself through its own climate recovery ordinance, and lead the way to forging a just transition off of fossil fuels for all of its residents. Our coalition has about 15 active members, with some of our core founding members highlighted in this picture here. And our local gas utility, as you may have figured out through the other presentations, is Northwest Natural, who has stood in opposition of our campaign at all levels, as that documentary illustrated for you all. So we have a threefold platform. The first item is to support policy to mandate that construction in Eugene be built all electric. We've been putting a lot of energy there. But we also are working to facilitate a just transition for frontline and historically marginalized communities, and working with local utilities to transition our grid to 100% renewable energy by 2030. In Eugene, we're incredibly fortunate because the Eugene Water and Electric Board is already at about 90% renewable energy, so closing that gap is a lot easier, and it's, makes a really big difference when we are transitioning to all electric, that we have that really clean grid. So I wanted to dig in really quickly to that second platform item and talk about the just transition piece. So this is really important in our campaign because when we look at the economic impacts of gas, the climate impacts of gas, and the health impacts of gas, which we could talk about all day, that could be an entirely different panel, but when we look at all of these categories, we see that historically marginalized and frontline communities are disproportionately impacted every single time. And these communities have also been historically underrepresented when in climate policy. And so it is incredibly central that we center these communities as we work to transition to clean renewable energy, and making sure that these communities are first, not last in this transition because of those disproportionate impacts. So we try and do this through providing trainings, resources to increase accessibility to the Inflation Reduction Act and other state, local, and national subsidies, also giving tools to help folks who have gas in the home who can't make that transition yet, but just to protect themselves health-wise. We work with utilities, and specifically the Eugene Water and Electric Board, and hopefully others, to reduce energy burden for folks. And we also are working to identify additional funding streams to support whole home retrofits, wanting to create some kind of justice fund to really help facilitate that transition. The coalition uses a number of tactics, and I think one of the things that makes Fossil Free Eugene a really strong grassroots group is that we not only show that there is public support for this transition to clean energy, but also just really illustrate and drive home the breadth and the widespread impact that this has on our community. Whenever I'm talking about Fossil Free Eugene tactics, coalition building is always at the top of the list. We not only have folks who are focused on climate, but we also have housing advocates, justice advocates. We work with architects and engineers and amazing lawyers and communications professionals. Every single person on this panel has been active in our campaign. And so we really are able to, I think, come at this from all angles, which is really powerful. Public testimony is a really important strategy that we use. Specifically, we've shown up at Eugene City Council quite a bit, as Councilor Leach can probably attest. Since I've been with the coalition, we have given testimony, upwards of 350 public comments. And so just really keeping a steady drumbeat there. We have put out sign-on letters. We do a lot of public education through tabling, creating resources, putting on webinars, workshops, trainings, and doing a lot of work through social media. We provide actionable items, action alerts that folks can easily and quickly complete to engage on this work. We work hard to keep Fossil Free Eugene in the media, and so folks can learn about what we're up to. We do public actions, climate marches and rallies, and we work with subject matter experts, again, leveraging the expertise of folks who can really get into the weeds on specific issues is so critical as we do this grassroots work. And I don't think I really need to talk about Northwest Natural's tactics. I think we covered that really well in the other presentations, but what I really just wanted to highlight on this slide is just the incredible amount of money that Northwest Natural pumps into their campaign, and which the gas industry at large has pumped into countering electrification despite the inevitability of this transition. So I wanted to go over a really brief campaign timeline to kind of bring this together and show you where we started and how we got to where we are. So Fossil Free Eugene formed in November of 2020 to encourage a just transition off of fossil fuels. One of the main reasons why the coalition came together was because Northwest Natural's franchise agreement was up for renewal, and this franchise agreement would have locked Eugene into, I believe, 20 more years or so of a contract with this gas utility, and just increasingly building out that fossil fuel infrastructure, which we were hoping not to need. So happily, the Eugene City Council voted not to renew that agreement. February 2021. November 2021, Eugene passed motions to make it the first Oregon city to advance an electrification mandate for new buildings. In August of 2022, there was a letter submitted to the Department of Justice asking for investigations of Northwest Natural's false and misleading ads focused on climate. This one is kind of an outlier. September 2022, City Councilor Claire Surratt was recalled. I just put this on here because I wanted to highlight, how much it can shift a campaign depending on who your elected leaders are. And when you lose a champion, it can really shift the dynamic. So that created some setbacks in our campaign. In November 2022, So Northwest Natural had proposed a hydrogen blending project in, surprise, surprise, an environmental justice neighborhood in Eugene, and happily that was canceled due to public pressure and a petition to the PUC. I believe the Sierra Club, Beyond Toxics, the NAACP were all part of that petition. Another awesome victory is February 2023, Eugene became the first city in Oregon to pass an ordinance prohibiting new gas in residential construction. And then we see things really starting to ramp up here. Northwest Natural funded a ballot referendum campaign in March 2023. They gathered the required signatures after spending $1 million in about 2 months, which is pretty significant. Then in April 2023, the Ninth Circuit Court did strike down the Berkeley's landmark electrification ordinance, as Jan mentioned. And then in July 2023, the Eugene City Council, in response, withdrew its electrification ordinance with the support of our coalition because of the legal uncertainty that Berkeley court case cast over our ordinance. And then that brings us to December 2023. Danny mentioned we submitted another letter to the Department of Justice about the false and misleading health information that was being put out by Northwest Natural. And so you can see it's been a really up and down campaign. There has been a lot of amazing wins and a lot of setbacks due to, as I said, the incredible amount of money that Northwest Natural has put into countering our specific campaign. But we're moving forward. There is a city council meeting scheduled in June to discuss the new buildings issue. Again, we're really trying to focus on the environmental justice aspects of our campaign, and we are excited to keep moving forward. So another really central part of our platform, or of our goals, is to try and move the entire electrification movement forward in Oregon. And I feel really happy and confident saying that I think we have blazed a trail that others are following. And it is really fantastic to see other cities in Eugene finding their own pathways to electrification. Shouting out Milwaukee, Ashland, Oregon is making some serious headway in their efforts to electrify, and this movement is completely youth-led, which is incredible. Talent, Oregon is making some headway. Bend is another great city to highlight. They are, a city that's very quickly growing, so putting in limits on gas in new construction would be huge in a city like Bend. Corvallis has a strong electrification movement, and this continues to grow. And this is really, what we want to see in the work that we do, no matter the setbacks, that we are moving forward as a state and as a country in this effort. So don't need to spend much time here. I just wanted to invite folks to get engaged with Fossil Free Eugene. There's a lot of ways that you can do that, and if you are not from Eugene, I encourage you to look and see if you have an electrification campaign in your community. If you don't, build your own coalition. I really encourage everyone to reach out to me for the slides, but also, just to talk about how we can engage on this work, organize, educate, and let's kick some gas together. All right, folks, let's open the floor up to questions right there in the back.
I have a question about the referendum that Northwest Natural funded. So whoever knows, was Northwest Natural directly pumping money in, through Northwest Natural to whoever the petitioners were, or were they donating little small amounts to disguise it? Is this an area where campaign finance reform might help in the future?
I don't know about the second question. I mean, maybe. It depends. But the first question, yeah, absolutely. So once the ordinance was passed, I think on February 6th, 2 or 3 days later, 2 entities were registered with the Oregon Secretary of State, a petition committee, which is a committee that exists specifically to fund signature gathering, and then a PAC, which is a more general committee for campaigns. They were registered by, he runs hundreds of PACs, but this guy at C&E Systems called Jeff Green, who Northwest Natural also works with. The only named people associated with it was a PR professional in Eugene called Anne-Marie Levis of Funk Levis, who then, later records showed was receiving tens of thousands of dollars. was going from this campaign to Funk Levis, essentially to run the campaign. And we think they were probably running the campaign because we saw those people involved, like employees of Funk Levis, wearing like Eugene for Energy Choice branded stuff, you know, while the ordinance was still being debated by council. You know, we saw these people show up to public hearings. Anyway, to sort of cut to it, yeah, I mean, a day or two after everything was funded, they started putting, from Northwest Natural Gas Company, you can look up the records, hundreds of thousands of dollars in, and they funded like 99.98% of those packs, you know, to these days. There's been a few other anonymous donations of $100 or less, but if it's over $100, you need to record it. And yet Northwest Natural has pretended that it's an independent thing, even though they own the domain name. They've, you know, run the website. The website had the same like layout originally as a Northwest Natural public affairs website, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a pretty blatant, you know, orchestration of a faux grassroots campaign.
And they were registered in Portland.
Yeah, they were registered in Portland. That was the other thing.
I just want to give a shout out to Breach Collective. Danny and Nick Caleb were absolutely relentless in uncovering and publicizing this information and really changed the trajectory of the public debate around this.
One thing I wanted to add very quickly is also, we're starting to see with the more sort of contentious advertising and stuff from Northwest Natural that they're putting this disclaimer, not paid for by Northwest Natural customers, which I think is an attempt to sort of evade, you know, PUC scrutiny for who they're billing this to. And, you know, they could be billing it to their shareholder equity or their debt equity or another dimension of their business, but like they are a 90% plus of their revenue comes from being a utility. So.
All right, we have quite a few hands here. Start with Barbara in the front.
Well, one major climate villain in the Northwest you didn't mention is Puget Sound Energy, which interestingly does gas and electricity. And my understanding is they were the spearhead of getting this whole coalition of gas companies together. But the other thing that is interesting to me is that UTC in Washington seems like their whole mission statement and everything sounds so much more positive than PUC in Oregon. However, my understanding is that they're totally captive by PSC.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I would just I thought that was interesting. I was curious how it was actually playing out on the ground in the Washington UTC. It'd be a question.
Wasn't there a settlement with PSC that they're not allowed to do certain types of advertising anymore?
It's so interesting. Like PSC, yes, is a climate villain, and it's sort of the best of the lot at the same time. They're so much better than Northwest Naturals and Cascade. So right now, the phone that rang in the middle of the presentation rudely was a state legislator in Washington. We are so close to negotiating a gas decarb bill in Washington that only applies to PSE. It's, you know, it's a step in the right direction, and it's a planning bill. But yeah, PSE is awful, and they're better than everyone else.
Great, we have, oh gosh, okay.
I think the quickest hand was the sparkly.
Yes.
This is for Jan. On your map, you had Colorado in shaded relief of the states that had not yet, and I'm assuming that's because of the ballot measure that we have. Colorado energy companies are running a ballot measure to ban the types of statutes that you're talking
Local
about.
regulation.
Is that not why you shaded it? You're kind of shaking your head at me.
I didn't make the map. I just pulled it off of a website, so I don't know anything about Colorado. But tell us more, because I mean these political fights are super difficult. They're extremely well funded by the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, there's a ballot measure in Colorado that it looks like the energy companies will be moving forward with to ban this type of regulation, which would put us not in line with the Pacific Northwest, it seems like. And I guess I'm just curious because I don't know what kind of chance it has of passing, and I don't know like how detrimental that would be to our overall climate efforts in Colorado. So I was just hoping to learn a little bit more about that.
So, I mean, when the Eugene fight, you know, we were going to run this fight in Eugene, and Northwest Naturals was going to spend $4 million in Eugene on this question. So you can only imagine the amount of money that the industry would be prepared to spend statewide. Dylan Plummer from Sierra Club was here. He would be a great one to answer this question. You need millions of dollars to win these public campaigns, and where's it going to come from? You know, and they fight dirty. They say, we want to take away your gas stove. Like the public polling on these is not great for us. Like the stove thing has become a little bit of a culture war signifier, and people don't care about the energy that heats their hot water, but they care about how they cook their food. That kind of runs deep. So it's scary. It's hard to win.
Do you know any groups that have fought against these types of ballot measures that we could maybe hook up with?
Well, Eugene started to.
I'd be interested to talk more
Yeah, we should
because
talk more.
I've been tracking what's happening with gas regulation in Colorado because it has historically been better than Oregon. Your clean heat, you have a clean heat program. So anyway, maybe we can talk after.
Yeah.
Joni?
I've been simmering for years on the idea about measuring the pollution not in dollars but in climate, in clean air, clean water. And I wonder if some of this underlying campaign would grab more people by talking about economy and the economy of clean air, water, future, that kind of thing. Not sure how to do this, but it feels like a timely place to reach out.
Take it as a comment. Thanks, Jenny. Any other questions? We've got a couple minutes.
In the back and not
Question about the map of the proposed natural gas pipeline. Is the major purpose of that delivering more natural gas to the Pacific Northwest, or is it part of the concerted effort of bringing natural gas and selling it to the Asian market?
Well, that's a big question. Like, where is all this gas going? To fill the context, there are export terminals that have been proposed on the West Coast. Here in Oregon, you beat the big terminal for Coos Bay. That was a huge victory for this movement. There are terminals in BC. Is the idea to put it on boats and ship it off or to use it. The weird thing is that the company was able to produce precedent agreements with utilities here including Cascade Gas and a utility in Oregon that said, yeah, we're willing to sign a 30-year agreement for this increased gas. And it's nuts. Like, how can Cascade Gas, especially, which is under, effectively a statutory mandate to phase out greenhouse gas emissions, how can it be signing a 30-year contract to buy more gas? And that's going to be the key question in front of FERC. Like, do they have to dig deeper than this piece of paper that they relied on?
And there's a lot of question about Amazon and its data centers out in Eastern Oregon. That was one potential, that was sort of our flag because they had fossil fuel cells that they were going to be relying on because they don't have enough electricity. The transmission is constrained to them. So that was the question, is whether Cascade's going to sell to Amazon or not.
I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I will say, I think we could probably stick around and keep chatting about this. I'm looking for, I think I saw an early hand over here that disappeared. Can I?
I feel like this claim for utility companies in like the Midwest is that with like peak demand, when it's really hot or really cold, is when it's most dangerous, the natural gas is still necessary in most states. Do you think that's a source of misinformation or not?
Yeah, Northwest Natural is actually engaged in that same rhetoric out here, even though they've constructed a very misleading study focusing on like peak demand during an ice storm, not the most recent one, but a ice storm we had in late 2022. We actually do, despite the weather today, have a pretty mild climate here, and the evidence that's been done, I think, by RMI and the Sierra Club shows that like you can be comfortable on an all-electric system, and it'll actually reduce, if we, particularly like, Jan asked how many people had a heat pump. Like, I have electric resistance heating and have had electric resistance heating, I think, in every home I've had in Eugene. If we can retrofit that with higher efficiency heat pumps, sometimes 3 or 4 times more efficient, that's going to reduce demand and leave people just as comfortable. So yeah, there are solutions. The Midwest poses, I think, some slightly different challenges, but it doesn't obviate the case to transition as much and as many buildings as possible.
But I'll just say that, oh yeah, Caleb, go ahead.
Well, I would add too, there's been lots of recent examples of the gas system failing during extreme cold recently. And so you even here just this winter, Jackson Prairie, gas storage facility, Washington State went down, and there was like really an emergency for about 6 hours there. And so the idea that somehow it's the most resilient fuel is not really holding up to reality.
We have problems with both sides, right? Like our gas utility have major problems, but our electric utilities do too, right? And so the fact that people were without electricity in Portland during the most recent ice storm, my parents lived with me for 6 days, right? Like because their electricity went out and then their pipes froze. And so that's a problem, right? And so we need to be holding our electric utilities equally accountable to assist in this transition so that people have reliable electricity when they need it.
Yeah, and in Eugene, the question really is who is more accountable? Wall Street traded, investor-owned, BlackRock owned, Northwest Natural, or the Eugene Water and Electricity Board that is democratically elected. And I have the phone number of one of the commissioners and can get a deal with him anytime. Right.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
And again, please, my email is up here. I can connect you with any one of the panelists or just send you the slides, so please do reach out.